Today's program is Criminal Justice, What We Know and Think, with Dr. Douglas Orr of the Spokane Police Department. Dr. Douglas Orr is a 26-year law enforcement veteran who has served as a commissioned police officer in South Carolina, Idaho, and here in Washington. Over the years, Dr. Orr has assumed various investigatory roles such as collision reconstructionist, street crimes, truancy, sexual assault, and polygraph. He's a detective serving as a computer forensics examiner in the Special Victims Unit of the Spokane Police Department here in Spokane. Dr. Orr is nationally certified as a polygraph examiner through the American Polygraph Association. Dr. Orr is also ENCE certified as well through Guidance Software. He holds membership in the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences, the American Society of Criminologists, and the Homicide Research Working Group. So just kind of boring groups there, it sounds like. His education is as follows. BA in Religious Education from Bob Jones University, an MA in Organizational Leadership from Gonzaga University, an MBA in Human Resources from St. Leo University, and a Ph.D. in Criminal Justice from Washington State University. So obviously very well learned, very well educated, and we have a great program today. Dr. Orr.
You heard all those degrees, but at my house, if you can't remember to put the seat down, none of it matters. So, he got it. Well, I want to thank you for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be here. Your president came up and asked me what you wanted to be called, and at the police department, they call me Detective Orr, and over at Gonzaga and WSU they call me Dr. Orr, and bad guys here in town call me something I can't repeat here. But after today, please call me Doug. I'd appreciate that. A little bit about me. He said 26 years in law enforcement, went back through grad school, figured there was something more I can contribute, and I guess the best thing about all that education is that I can give it back to you. And that's what I've done for the last 26 years. What I wanted to do today really quickly is to do something a little bit different. Most people, when they get me aside, they want to talk about polygraph, or they want to talk about computers, or they want to talk about research, or they want to talk about the police department. And a lot about the Spokane Police Department has been good, and some of it not so good. But I want to take our minds off of that, and I want to plant a seed today. Probably ask a lot more questions than maybe some answers, but maybe we can do that together. And I'll handle some questions afterwards. Also, when the program concludes, I'll be free to stick around and mill around. If there's something you don't want to ask publicly and you want to come up to me later on, that's fine too. So, criminal justice, what we think and what we know. How many of you were born here in the Pacific Northwest? Wow. Okay. Okay. I was kind of hoping for a little less, but I grew up in Philadelphia. The city of brotherly shove, 4 million people. And coming here, I've been living here for 20 years, but coming here was a real shock. Especially, I started out living in Coeur d'Alene in the Hayden area, so that was really small compared to Philadelphia. But as everyone else is, just aghast with the beauty, the way of life that we have here, and very much the people drew me here. So we enjoy that. One thing, though, that is really, really odd is that our crime levels are a little bit higher, in fact, marginally higher, than most anywhere in the nation, most anywhere in the state. And you've probably seen newspaper articles for that. We'll talk about that a little bit right now. Do I point it over here?
Shouldn't have to point it.
Just, okay. All across the nation, you've heard about this crime drop. Crime is down everywhere, and it's been happening since the 1990s. A lot of the charts you'll see, especially on the internet, you can get all these charts. A lot of them start in 1973, and you see the crime drop right around 1990, 93, and it keeps going down. A marked difference there. And just by way of research, why do you think a lot of those charts start around 1973? Expo? No. What happened in this nation in 1973? Legalized abortion. By about 1990, that group of people that aren't here, 53 million of them, are not here, would have been committing crimes, or those people that we didn't want would have been predisposed to crime. That's the theory. Not a whole lot of research on that, Probably not going to get a whole lot of funding for research on that, but still something we have to respect. 53 million people are simply not here today. So in trying to explain the crime drop, some people will say legalized abortion, some people will say it is this massive incarceration that we have over the past 20 years. Probably not so much that, simply because Canada has had the same crime drop, but they have nowhere near the incarceration levels we do in this country. So just a tidbit there. The only thing that really just skyrocketed around 1990 was juvenile homicide, juveniles committing homicide. And the idea, the speculation is that we've taught them that life really isn't worth anything growing up since Roe versus Wade. And I'm not making a political statement, I'm just saying researchers look at that sort of thing. But crime is down all over the nation. I'm going to duel you here. So just, could you go back one more slide? Look at Spokane City. You look at the United States, and here in Washington the levels are a little bit higher, but here in Spokane City, levels in property crime are considerably higher than the rest of the nation. Let's go to the next slide. Violent crime. How many of you live in the unincorporated areas of the county? You live outside the city limits, okay. Outside Spokane Valley and outside Spokane City. You look comparatively at some of your counties that you have, and I didn't include Yakima because Yakima is quite different than Spokane, Clark, and Kitsap, and Thurston. But with violent crime, we're somewhere in the middle. And violent crime, really not a whole lot that police departments and sheriff's departments can do about that. That more rests with social agencies and preventative programs. But as we look at property crime, something that the police and the sheriff's departments usually can get a handle on, here in Spokane County, we're still far above the rest. You'll notice the big spike back in the early 2000s at the end of the Mark Stirk administration. He had a mass, emphasis on retrieving career criminals. And so we incarcerated a lot of people there around 2004, 2005. So, but still, respectively, as things continue to go, we're still a lot more higher above the, increased above the rest. Let's go to the next one. So why? In 2008, the county decided to contract with Dr. David Bennett to examine our system, find out what's wrong. And he described it as broken, which is a pretty good example, a pretty good description. He said our incarceration rates are inverted. All that really means is that nationwide, the country is incarcerating 30% and putting 70% on probation or programs. Here in Spokane, we were doing it completely opposite. We were incarcerating 70% and putting 30% into programs. Recidivism is high. That means those people keep coming back. Case attrition is high. That means the cases we do get, we're not really doing a whole lot with them. And the alternatives are underutilized. The programs that even the ones that we do have, we're not using them either enough or correctly. So, you've heard a lot about the jail, and I hear some laughing. And I try to tap in. Every time I go to talk to people, I try to tap in. I was sitting down here at the table, and I said to someone at the table, I said, well, what do you think? And they said, well, you know, we're just not using the programs we have, and before we build a better jail, I think if we have better programs, we won't need a new jail. That's what I'm thinking. I'd like to learn a lot more about it myself. But we've heard talk about a new jail. We've talked about replacing Geiger. We've talked about a new treatment facility, all to the tune of about $200 million. For a house, about $200,000 a year, that's about $7 a month. I'm not going to talk about that, but this is something to think about. What we don't know, when we don't know what to do, we do more of what we think. How many of you have been in a business meeting, obviously, when the person in charge just says what they think, and that's what we're all going to go with, and everyone sits there and does this? Okay, doing what they think and a little less of what they know. Of course, being my background, I rest completely on the research. I have never had, and I teach online as well, distance learning, and so a lot of my crowd there, my student population there in distance learning, they're quite a bit older. A lot of them are police lieutenants, captains, police chiefs, and even some sheriffs. And I've never heard any one of them say, you know, Dr. Orr, we followed the research on this, and it was a complete disaster. Nobody's ever told me that. What I do hear is, well, it was a good idea at the time, or it's his idea, or they were the lowest bidder. That's what we hear a lot of. They do more of what they think and not what we know. We need to be doing more of what we know. In the criminal justice system, we serve three masters, and I know, I don't know, it was George Bush Sr. said it, you know, money trumps everything else. We serve costs, of course, and I wouldn't want the job of a county commissioner or a city council member. Certainly some tough decisions they have to make, but we're a slave to cost. We're also a slave to risk, public safety, your well-being, and that psychosocial element where we're trying to make people better, trying to build a better citizen. You see my little scale here. Over on the left, you've got some programs that are completely unsupervised all the way up to incarceration. That's sort of a scale. Well, cost is going to go up. As the more people we incarcerate, the more cost is going to go up. And the more that we incarcerate people, the risk goes down. So public safety is increased, but we're incarcerating more people. It's more expensive. And if you look over here in the programs, when we first started this back in the 70s, remember back then when we said that criminals, we wanted to give them more self-esteem in the system. Remember, got to give them more self-esteem. Well, what did that really do? You just had a criminal in some class, don't you? Those programs really didn't work simply because they weren't researched and they weren't founded on good empirical research. Today it's much different. 20 years later, things are different. We know a lot more. And deterrence, let me just say a word about that. A lot of people, you know, really come to an idea in their head what they form about deterrence and what people are not going to do when we make laws. Your panhandler law, they were gone for about what, a couple weeks? They're back out there now, aren't they? We now have some new legislation about marijuana today. So good luck with that. And you got to understand, I come from a conservative background, and I'm very objective. But you know, I try to say, you know, prohibition does keep, for all the evils that it is, prohibition does keep usage down, and that's all I'll say about it. You're going to experience a large social cost, just like you did with alcohol. So, but it's horrible policy making to enact a law and then say, well, we'll have a year to deal with it and figure out all the details later. Just can't do that. Anyway, the psychosocial element, you can see that we can make it better, but even dips down below in certain areas where we don't tailor those programs or tailor the incarceration to the individual. The flock shooting approach, researchers telling us it's not working. When we do more of what we know, the outcome is usually valid and reliable. When we follow the research, what we do is valid and reliable. What I mean by that? Now, validity, for those of you who have an educational background, we're just studying, we know what we're studying. In other words, if I was to say, what's a good example? If I wanted to learn what all criminals thought about home burglaries, well, if I was to go to a penitentiary and interview all those inmates, I wouldn't be finding out what all criminals believe about burglary. I'm missing a very important population, aren't I? The ones who haven't been caught. And if we knew a lot more about that population, we'd probably catch them. So in that respect, I'm not learning all about criminals. I'm learning about all criminals. I'm learning about just the ones that are incarcerated. So we have to know what we're studying. A good example of this today is, how many of you, stick up your hand if you've heard that property crime is driven by the drug trade? Okay. Well, I'll give you the academic answer to that. It depends. And really, there's an indirect relationship. And what the research is showing us in this regard, and a lot of it is from economists, not from social scientists. The economists are showing us that how police allocate their resource is what is driving this property crime. It's not so much the drug trade. And let me explain that to you. For the economic explanation, you're told that the drugs are driving it, so that the police decide, well, we're going to attack the supply side. We're going to go out and get the drug dealers. Well, what are you doing there? Economically, what are you doing? You're thinning the herd, aren't you? You're driving the price up, okay? So this causes more property crime because do they sit around and think, you know, eggs, milk, butter, breaking into a house, you know, that's to get my drugs. Let's see, oh, drugs went up. Oh, Vicodin went up $80 a pill. Gee, I can't do that this week. No, they're going to go out and get it. And they're going to steal more of your stuff because it's not their stuff, it's your stuff. So they're going to steal it. So property crime increases. Criminologically, when police move a resource from attacking property crimes, whether it's through investigation, what we used to do at the police department, or proactive, call it hunting now, when you move resources away from that and you put them on drugs, you created a void over here. There's no longer that deterrence. Okay? And again, I'll caution you with deterrence. You remember, what's another good example? Back in '75, a little plastic shark on a movie screen kept us all out of the water, millions of people. But you put a little warning on a cigarette box that says this will kill you. Millions of people just completely disregard it. So when you have deterrence figured out, let me know. But what we do know over the last 20 years is that when police move something to another place, there's going to be that void, there's going to be that deterrence. So people who have been doing it are going to do more of it, and people who haven't done it would be more tempted to do so or would start doing it. So we have to know exactly what we're doing when it comes to what we're studying. We can't say that the property crime is driven by drugs. It is indirectly. But how police allocate those resources, it's very important. Okay, next slide. Reliability. Something that we can do over and over again and we get the same result. And a good example here is the domestic violence law that we've had for the last 20, 30 years. Back then, there was a lot of public awareness about this, that spouses were dying. We needed to do something about this. The police weren't handling the situation correctly, so the idea was, what someone thought was, that if we arrest these people every time, at every instance, domestic violence will go down. And so researchers went out and did a study on that in a controlled environment, and they came up with the result that, sure enough, when the police made a mandatory arrest, when they were told they had to make an arrest, that domestic violence went down. Well, of course, everyone wanted to make policy on that. And so states went on this binge of enacting these mandatory arrest laws. Well, researchers were saying, whoa, we haven't replicated this. So when they started doing that, they found that in some areas, in some different contexts, that it actually drove the domestic violence crime rate up. So we've made this policy based on something that wasn't reliable. Go ahead to the next one. And this just to give you an example here of the dismissals. This is a 2008 snapshot. It's a little bit older, but it shows you some of the case attrition of the district court dismissals that we have, or had then. 61% of them are domestic violence. So now you're telling your police officers they have to go into an area and they're required to inject themselves into an arrest situation. 61% of the time, you're just going to dismiss the case. And that's not the fault of the prosecutor. That's just sometimes witnesses don't show up. They're reluctant, especially in a situation like that. They don't want to be there. So you see how bad policy is made. When we do it, the research has to be valid and reliable. Here's the heart of the problem. This is what I want to talk to you a little bit about today. The people, or what we're doing now in Spokane County, people keep coming back. You look out at the jail, and for the misdemeanors and felonies, quite evenly divided there. You see down there, nobody's coming back 1 to 3 times they're coming back, 4 to 8 times they're coming back, 9 to 35 times they're coming back. That's a quarter, 9 to 35, that's a quarter of the population, the jail population, coming back. You look at Geiger, it's a lot more. 64% of the time, they're coming back 9 to 17 times. We're not doing something right. We're doing a lot of what we think, but not a lot of what we know. So, where's the disconnect? And again, I'm not making a political statement here, but this is what I see when I talk to people and what I read in the literature, that a lot of the conservative groups, this is a group that I hang out with, they interpret the Constitution very, very individually. A good example is, you take the First Amendment. I'll just use an example. They believe that the First Amendment protects the church from the state. The more liberal perspective, they believe that the First Amendment protects the state from the church. And I mean, and we see that. And then we also see that in the liberal perspective, some of the early resolution programs, they're applied individually. So you've got the conservatives interpreting the Constitution individually, but you've got them applying it collectively. And what do I mean by that? So you'll see that a lot of the tough on crime stuff that we've heard in the past few years, it's flock shooting. It's 3 strikes, you're out. You know, it doesn't matter if you're the pregnant clerk at the 7-Eleven or if you're the career criminal. 3 strikes, you're out, you're going. It's not tailored toward the individual. More liberal perspective, they interpret the Constitution collectively, and you see that a lot having to do with maybe like guns. And we could sit here and talk all day about this. You know, conservatives believe in pro-life, but yet they believe in the death penalty. You know, liberals, what's a good example there with guns? I mean, liberals would like to say social values will cure all the ills and we don't need to make all these laws, but when it comes to guns, then completely different. So we're mixed. where we connect with the Constitution. And I love the Constitution, and I really, and I don't want you to misunderstand me here. I'm not for all of the weird, arresting federal agents and all that kind of thing. I just love the Constitution. And it is a 230-year-old to-do list, and we better start following it. And I think when we start getting our ideas together and connecting with one another, we can start making some progress and start breaking down some of these walls. Next. That gives rise, this disconnect gives rise to this idea that there's just the good guys and the bad guys. That's what society's made of. Us and them. And with the way we want to treat people, that's not going to get it. Let's go to the next slide. What you have in society is the well-meaning, you have the weak, and you have the willful. The well-meaning, that's us. Outside of a DUI or even worse, those people that transport fruit across state lines. Yeah, I'm talking to you. Those of us, that's us, the well-meaning. Then there's the weak, those people that maybe didn't have a good shot in life. Maybe haven't had a good role model to look, maybe haven't had a good mentor, made some mistakes, need a helping hand to get out of that trouble they're in. Then there's the willful. Those people who have demonstrated to us time and time again that they are not receptive to any treatment and that they will take our stuff, they will hurt us. And those people, man, if I was in charge, I would build my career around hunting them down and putting them in that old jail and giving them a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and an orange jumpsuit. And keep them there because they're the ones that are hurting us. So that's who we have. If we spent a little bit more money on helping the weak, we would see reductions in crime, reductions in recidivism. You look at some of the cognitive behavioral stuff that they're using with convicted sex offenders. A population of people who get a lot of bad press for very good reasons, but a very large population of people who really aren't committing new crimes because the treatment they're getting is successful. You look at the drug court, the mental health court, and with some of the reductions in costs we're seeing this year, those two might be even combined, or a lot of it might go away, and that's not good. We're seeing a lot of reductions there. 10 to 20% reduction in supervised treatment, substance abuse. With just putting someone in jail, you're not bringing crime down, not at all. With some of the boot camps and some of the scared straight things, the 3 strikes you're out, we are not, other than what you would think. I mean, you would think that showing someone, we expect people when we put them in jail that they're going to be sorry for what they did. And they're going to feel real bad about that. And the more time we give them, the more sorry they're going to feel. Well, they don't call them penitentiaries anymore because nobody's penitent. We call them correctional facilities. So if there's anything we can learn from the last 20 years of research, it's celerity and certainty. We move them through the system very quickly, we adjudicate them quickly, and we show them that their misdeeds are going to be treated immediately. Long, lengthy sentences have not shown to have any success. Just a good example here, the HOPE program, where you tailor your treatment to the needs of the individual. You're seeing marked decreases in recidivism in a program like that. Treating the individual. And I realize up front, spending a little bit more money to have more of a focus on the person that comes through the system. I'll give you a good example. You get a guy, you have these work programs, and yes, we do need to teach people how to show up to work on time. We need to show people on how to keep a checkbook and things like that. We need to do that for our offenders to get them back into society. But if you've got a guy convicted of embezzlement and he's been working for a corporation for 15 years, he doesn't need a work program. That's $2,000 that we've just wasted. So we need to tailor these programs to the individuals. So, change our thinking so that we can change our behavior. Install lasting organization improvements through better resource targeting. Be process-oriented instead of policy-oriented. Let's look at the idea rather than politically what our policy is going to be. Make decisions based on the balanced idea of cost avoidance and cost benefit. And a good example here is, if you read any articles in the Inlander, one, I want to say about 4 or 5 months ago, dealt with home electronic monitoring. And the idea that the city stuck with it because they spent some money up front and they experienced $1 or $2 million in savings, cost benefit. Whereas the county abandoned it and said, this is costing us too much. So if we have a balanced approach to that, we'll probably succeed. Smart Justice Conference here in town not too long ago, lots of good input. I think they really skirted the jail issue. They didn't talk about it too much, which is something we really needed to talk about and discuss there at that forum. But a lot of the literature you'll read about smart justice, it's specific. If we're going to do something, we need to define it, not this willy-nilly stuff. It needs to be measurable so that people like me can look at it and determine whether or not it has an impact, that it's attainable, that the goals are realistic, that it's relevant to our community here in Spokane, and that it's time-based, that we have some constraints on what needs to happen. With that, I'll take some of your questions.
I recall a program talking in the 1950s and 60s that their recidivism rate was much less during those periods. Is that correct?
Recidivism for crime.
For crime, and it was probably in federal penitentiaries, that they were able, the criminals were not returning as often.
That is true, yes, with some of the research that was done. It's been explained to me, and I thought this was kind of interesting. I asked a sociology professor about this one time. They were talking about different things that were going on over the years, and I said, well, what about the 50s, you know? It seems like a nice time in our country, you know? I wasn't around, but Dad says it was pretty cool, you know? He said it was a nice time, but they said that was an anomaly. The 50s were an anomaly. I'm not so quite sure about that, but people didn't spend money on research back then. The incarceration rates were nowhere near what they are today, right around the 70s. And you got to understand that public figures sometimes rely on distractions. With Nixon, we didn't want to, you know, he probably didn't want people to read in the newspaper about bombing Cambodia, so he came up with this war on crime here at home and distracted us. Now I'll pick on my own people. Some of the conservatives now, they're seeing some of the mistakes they've made with this tough on crime measure, and so now they need a distraction. So now, we've got the public employee now. We're going to hammer their pension systems. We're going to hammer this and hammer that. So a lot of distraction. Here in the last 20 years, you've seen some money that's been really dedicated to some good research, and it's showing us a lot about these. It's really twisting our arm a little bit, conservatives and liberals, to get what we need to get done. This is the sign. Can I take one more question?
You bet.
Yeah, you noted up there that the highest success rate was cognitive programs. What are some examples of cognitive programs that you see work best?
Again, changing someone's thinking. They do this in group therapy and they do it in individual therapy where they're changing the person's mind about thinking. And I'll give you an example, and this may sound even ludicrous to you, but I had the contract with I still do, with Washington State Department of Corrections to do polygraph examinations for sex offenders. And when they come in for their periodic polygraph, I always want to ask them, you know, what are you doing in treatment? Without forfeiting any personal information, how's it going? And one guy, he's even got this rubber band, and every time he has a bad thought about what would trigger him to recidivate or think, he just pulls that thing back and lets it go. And I realize that might be comical to some of you, but that's some of the way they're changing the thinking. And being able to get it out. The number one gateway, or the gateway to treatment, is accountability. And you know, with conservatives, I can tell them this is costing you way too much. But with liberals, I have to say there has to be some accountability to these programs. And one way is getting them into treatment, getting them accountable. They can't get into treatment without saying, "I did it, and I'm sorry." Not only I did it, but I'm sorry. Those are the best programs.
You bet.